The penthouse air was thick with the scent of expensive lilies and the sharp, metallic tang of chilled champagne. From the floor-to-ceiling windows, the Chicago skyline glittered like a spilled jewelry box, but Elena Vance didn't have time to look at the view. She adjusted Julian's tuxedo for the third time that night. "The Miller designs are in the study if the investors ask," she whispered, her voice strained from a week of all-nighters. "I smoothed out the structural issues you had with the cantilevered balcony. It's perfect now." Julian Thorne didn't look at her. He was busy admiring his own reflection in the darkened glass. He smoothed his dark hair, his jawline sharp enough to cut glass. "Good. Make sure the catering staff keeps the trays moving, Elena. This party needs to feel effortless." "Effortless," Elena repeated with a faint smile. She had spent 14 hours today coordinating the guest list, correcting Julian's sketches, and ensuring his favorite vintage of scotch was stocked. She felt like the foundation of a skyscraper, hidden underground under immense pressure, while the world only admired the shiny spire on top. As the night wore on, the party became a blur of silk dresses and sharp suits. Elena felt a headache blooming behind her eyes. She retreated toward the small library at the back of the penthouse to find some aspirin. She was about to turn the brass handle when she heard Julian's distinctive, smooth-as-velvet laugh from inside. "She's a godsend, really," Julian was saying. Elena paused, her heart fluttering. Was he finally acknowledging her work to his friends? "But Julian," Marcus, Julian's business partner, replied, "don't you think marrying your business manager is a bit uninspired? You're the face of the new Chicago movement. You need a partner who brings more than just a spreadsheet to the table." Elena held her breath, waiting for Julian to defend her, to tell them she was the one who had redesigned the North Pier project from scratch. "Marrying Elena isn't about inspiration, Marcus. It's about utility. She's a great assistant. She handles the grunt work I hate, and she's safe. She doesn't have the vision to be a real partner in the firm. She's a draftswoman at best, but she's loyal. Or she was until the Henderson girl started showing interest." A cold chill washed over Elena. "The billionaire's daughter?" asked Marcus, impressed. "Lydia Henderson?" "She can elevate the Thorne brand to a global level. Elena is the beige paint of women, necessary but ultimately replaceable once you can afford the wallpaper." The library door creaked as Elena's hand slipped. The conversation inside stopped. Elena pushed the door open. Her face felt hot, her skin crawling with the weight of his betrayal. Julian stood by the mahogany desk, a glass of amber liquid in his hand. He didn't look guilty. He looked mildly inconvenienced. "Elena, you shouldn't eavesdrop," he said smoothly. "It's a poor habit." "A draftswoman?" Elena's voice was a jagged shard of glass. "I stayed up until 4 a.m. fixing your structural errors, Julian. I gave up my own internship at Foster & Partners to run your back office because you said we were a team." "We were a team that served a purpose, but I've outgrown this version of the firm, Elena, and frankly, I've outgrown you." "Julian, we're supposed to be married in 3 months," she whispered, the diamond on her fingers suddenly feeling like a lead weight. "The wedding is off," he said, checking his watch. "I've already had my lawyer draft the termination papers for your position at the firm. Since the apartment is a company asset in my name, I'll need you out by tomorrow morning. I've already moved your things into the hallway." Elena felt the world tilt. "You're firing me? You're evicting me? At our engagement party?" "Don't be dramatic, it's just business," Julian said, walking toward the door. He paused, looking back at her. "I'll let you keep the ring. Consider it a severance package." Elena looked down at the ring. With a trembling hand, she twisted it off and threw it. It bounced off his chest and clattered onto the hardwood floor. "I don't want your severance," she spat, her voice shaking with a rage she didn't know she possessed. 2 hours later, Elena stood on the rain-slicked sidewalk of Michigan Avenue. 2 suitcases sat at her feet, all she had left of 5 years. She pulled out her phone and checked her bank app. Balance: $512.63. The wind whipped her hair across her face, stinging like a whip. She looked up at the glowing penthouse where the party was still raging, the music muffled by the glass she had helped pay for. She wasn't just heartbroken, she was erased. Elena gripped the handle of her suitcase until her knuckles turned white. She had built Julian Thorne's world brick by brick. Now she was going to build her own, and she was going to make sure it was tall enough to cast a shadow over everything he touched. The radiator in Elena's new studio apartment hissed like a cornered cat, puffing out dry, metallic-smelling heat that did little to combat the draft seeping through the window frames. It was a far cry from the climate-controlled perfection of the penthouse. Here, the air smelled of old wood, turpentine, and the yeast from the bakery downstairs. Elena sat on a thrifted stool, her back aching. For 3 weeks, she had lived on black coffee and the adrenaline of pure spite. By day, she took soul-crushing freelance drafting jobs, fixing the messy lines of student architects or drawing up boring kitchen remodels for suburban contractors. But by night, the small drafting table in the corner became her sanctuary. Spread across it were the requirements for the Aurora Tech Campus, the most prestigious anonymous competition in the country. Julian had talked about nothing else for a year. He wanted it because it meant a billion-dollar legacy. Elena wanted it because it was the only way to prove she existed without his name attached to hers. She picked up her 2B pencil. For years, she had drawn in Julian's style, sharp angles, imposing glass, structures that looked like they were designed to intimidate anyone who entered them. She started to draw a cold, towering spire, then stopped. Her hand shook. "Beige paint," Julian's voice echoed in her head. "Utility." With a low growl of frustration, Elena crumpled the vellum paper and tossed it into a mountain of discarded ideas. She didn't want to build a monument to an ego. She wanted to build something that breathed. She began again. This time, she thought about the people who would work there. She designed communal gardens that filtered rainwater, walkways that followed the natural curve of the human gait, and walls made of warm, reclaimed timber and smart glass that captured the prairie sun. It wasn't safe, it was revolutionary. A week later, seeking a break from the 4 walls of her studio, Elena took her sketchbook to a quiet, dimly lit workspace in the West Loop. She was hunched over a detail of a cantilevered garden when a shadow fell across her page. "The structural load on that terrace is going to be a nightmare if you use traditional steel," a deep, quiet voice remarked. Elena looked up. Standing there was a man in a charcoal sweater, his sleeves pushed back to reveal forearms corded with the kind of strength that came from actual labor, not a gym. He had steady, slate-gray eyes and a face that looked like it had been carved out of granite, not pretty like Julian, but handsome in a rugged, permanent way. "It's not steel," Elena said, her defensive walls rising. "It's a reinforced timber polymer composite. It's 1/3 the weight and carbon neutral." The man leaned in, his gaze intensifying as he scanned her drawings. He didn't look at her like she was an assistant. He looked at the lines like they were a language he spoke fluently. A living building. Most architects are too afraid of the maintenance costs to even propose this. Most architects care more about how the building looks on a magazine cover than how the people inside feel, Elena countered. The man's lips quirked into a ghost of a smile. I'm Silas, and you are? Elena, she said, purposely leaving off her last name. She didn't want to be Elena Vance, the fired fiancé. Well, Elena, Silas said, sliding a business card onto the table. It was heavy, cream-colored cardstock with a simple embossed logo, Sterling Ventures. If you ever decide to stop hiding those sketches in a sketchbook and start putting them into the ground, call me. I value talent that prioritizes humanity over optics. He walked away before she could respond. Elena stared at the card. Silas Sterling. The man was the lead investor for the tech campus project. He was the kingmaker of the Chicago skyline, and he had just called her talented. A month later, the first-round results of the Aurora competition were announced. Elena was huddled in her coat, staring at her laptop screen in the dark studio. Her breath hitched as she scrolled down the list of the top 5 finalists who would move on to the live presentation. Entry number 402, The Hearth, lead architect, anonymous. She had made it. She had beaten out hundreds of firms, including, she hoped, Julian's. The victory was sweet, but the world had a way of curdling it. 2 days later, a familiar black town car pulled up to the curb outside her apartment building. Julian stepped out, looking wildly out of place against the peeling brick and graffiti. He met her as she was coming home with a bag of groceries. He looked her up and down, his lip curling at her worn coat. I heard you were living in a charming part of town, Elena, but this is bleak even for you, Julian said, his tone dripping with practiced pity. Elena gripped the handles of her grocery bag. What do you want, Julian? I'm in a bind. The Aurora project, my lead designer, quit, and the first-round judges gave my firm a mediocre rating for lack of soul. Apparently, my new vision is a bit too clinical. He stepped closer, smelling of expensive cologne and arrogance. I'm willing to be the bigger person. I'll hire you back, not as a manager, but as a junior associate. I'll even let you stay in my guest suite until you get back on your feet. You clearly need a win. Elena looked at the man she had once thought she loved. He didn't see a person. He saw a tool that had stopped working and needed a tune-up. A junior associate? Elena let out a sharp, dry laugh. You want me to save your firm again, Julian, to give you the soul you're missing? I'm offering you a lifeline. Without me, you're just a draftswoman with $500 to your name. Elena stepped towards him, her eyes flashing with a fire that made him instinctively take a step back. You're wrong. Without me, you're just a suit with a fancy title and no ideas. I'm not coming back, Julian. Not now, not ever. You'll starve, he hissed, his mask of charm finally slipping to reveal the petty man underneath. I'd rather starve as myself than feast as your ghostwriter. Elena turned her back on him and walked into the building. As she climbed the stairs to her tiny, cold apartment, she felt lighter than she had in years. She sat down at her desk, picked up her pencil, and began to refine the designs for the final presentation. She wasn't just a draftswoman anymore. She was the competition. And Julian Thorne had no idea that the nobody who was currently beating him was the woman he had thrown away. The week leading up to the final presentation for the Aurora Tech Campus felt like living inside a pressure cooker. Elena's studio was a graveyard of empty espresso cups and crumpled vellum. She had moved past the spite phase and into something deeper, a flow state where the lines she drew felt like extensions of her own veins. The hearth was no longer just a building, it was a philosophy. She had designed the central atrium to breathe, using a passive ventilation system inspired by termite mounds, and she had integrated a transition zone where employees could decompress between high-stress meetings and the outside world. She was pinning a final rendering of the rooftop garden to her board when a knock echoed through the thin wooden door. It was Silas Sterling. He wasn't in a suit today. He wore a heavy wool coat over a simple black t-shirt. He looked less like a venture capitalist and more like the carpenter he had once been. "I'm early for our check-in," he said, stepping into the small space. His presence seemed to shrink the room. He didn't comment on the peeling wallpaper or the smell of cheap noodles. He walked straight to the renderings. He stood in silence for a long time. Elena felt her heart hammering against her ribs. "You didn't just design a campus," Silas said quietly, his eyes tracing the curve of the timber rafters. "You designed a community. I've seen 300 entries for this project, Elena. Most of them are monuments to the architects' egos. This is a monument to the people who will actually inhabit it." "I wanted it to feel like it cared about them," Elena whispered. Silas turned to her, his gaze intense. "It does, but be careful. The board is conservative, and Julian Thorne is playing a very different game." "What do you mean?" "He's campaigning. He's taking board members to 5-course dinners, showing them flashy VR walkthroughs of his glass tower. He knows he's lagging behind the anonymous 402 in the design scores, and he's trying to win through politics." "Let him," Elena said, though her stomach twisted. "The design will speak for itself." The blow came 48 hours before the final presentation. Elena was at the local library using their high-speed internet to upload her final files when her phone began to buzz incessantly. Notifications from architectural blogs and local news sites flooded her screen. Breaking: rising star Julian Thorne files lawsuit against anonymous rival for intellectual property theft. She clicked the link. The article featured a side-by-side comparison. On one side was a sketch of a modular garden wall Elena had designed for Thorne's firm 3 years ago. On the other was a detail from The Hearth. The headline read, "Ex-former employee accused of stealing Thorne firm's living architecture concepts." Julian hadn't just filed a lawsuit, he had released a statement to the press. "It is heartbreaking when a former employee whom we supported and mentored chooses to retaliate against a professional parting by claiming our proprietary research as her own. Elena Vance was a competent draftswoman, but the soul she claims to bring to her work was developed under my direct supervision and remains the property of Thorne Architecture." Within an hour, Elena's inbox was full of messages from the Aurora Committee. Her status as a finalist was under review. The world she had been rebuilding brick by brick began to crumble. She sat in her apartment, the blue light of the monitor washing her out, feeling that familiar, crushing sense of invisibility. Julian was right. To the world, she was just the girl behind the man. Who would believe the beige paint could create a masterpiece? She stayed in her apartment for the next 12 hours, the lights off, watching the shadows of the elevated train flicker across her ceiling. She considered not showing up. She considered packing her 2 suitcases again and moving back to her parents' house in Ohio. A knock at the door startled her. It wasn't a polite knock of a neighbor, it was a firm, rhythmic demand. She opened it to find Silas. He looked furious. "Why aren't you answering your phone?" he asked. "I'm being disqualified, Silas. You saw the news. He's going to sue me into the ground. I don't have the money for a lawyer, let alone a PR team." Silas stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. "Do you think I'm an idiot, Elena? I've been in this industry for 15 years. I know a Julian Thorne when I see one. He's a curator, not a creator. He collects people like you and uses them until they're empty." "It doesn't matter what you know," Elena sobbed, the frustration finally breaking through. "He has the history. He has the firm name. I have a $500 bank account and a studio that smells like wet dog." Silas walked over and gripped her shoulders, forcing her to look at him. His hands were warm and steady. "He is terrified of you. That's why he's doing this. He saw your work. I suspect he found out who Anonymous 402 was through a leak in the committee, and he realized he couldn't beat you on merit, so he's trying to kill you before you get to the stage." Silas pulled a folder from his coat. "These are the North Pier project records from 3 years ago. I had my team dig them up today. Your initials are on every structural revision. Julian's name is on the cover, but your signature is on the soul of the building." He leaned in closer, his voice a low growl. "Tomorrow is the presentation. You can stay here and let him erase you, or you can go to that boardroom and tell them exactly who built Julian Thorne's empire and why you're the only one who can build the future." Elena looked at the folder, then at Silas. For the first time, she didn't see a rival or a kingmaker. She saw someone who was handing her a sword. "He called me beige paint," Elena whispered. Silas's eyes softened, but his grip remained firm. "Then show him that beige is just the canvas. You're the one who decides what gets painted on it." Elena took a deep breath, the cold Chicago air filling her lungs. The fear was still there, but it was being crowded out by a cold, hard resolve. "I need a suit," she said. Silas smiled. "I know a tailor. Let's go." The boardroom of the Sterling Group sat on the top floor of a skyscraper that seemed to pierce the very belly of the clouds. Inside, the atmosphere was surgical: white marble, brushed steel, and the oppressive silence of 5 board members whose decisions carried the weight of $1 billion. Elena stood in the lobby, smoothing the front of her navy blue suit. It was tailored so perfectly it felt like armor. Beside her, Silas checked his watch. He didn't offer a pep talk, he simply caught her eye and nodded. That look told her everything. You belong here. The double doors swung open, and Julian Thorne walked out. He looked triumphant. He was surrounded by a phalanx of junior architects, all of them looking exhausted. When Julian saw Elena, his smile didn't falter, it sharpened. "Ah, the Anonymous entry 402, Julian said, loud enough for the board members inside to hear. "I'm surprised you showed up, Elena. I thought your lawyer would have advised you to stay in hiding after the IP theft filing." One of the board members, a woman with iron gray hair named Meredith, looked up from her tablet. "Mr. Thorne, we are here to judge designs, not legal disputes." "Of course," Julian said, stepping closer to Elena, his voice dropping to a low, venomous hiss. "But it's hard to judge a design when the person presenting it is a fraud. Don't embarrass yourself, Elena. Walk away now and I might drop the suit. Go back to being the beige paint. It suits you." Elena didn't blink. She didn't flinch. She simply looked at him, really looked at him, and realized he looked small. He was a man built of reflections with nothing solid at his core. "My turn, Julian," she said softly. She walked into the boardroom. Silas took his seat at the head of the table, his face a mask of professional neutrality. Elena set her portfolio down. She didn't lead with a flashy VR headset or a 3D printed model draped in silk. She began with a single hand-drawn sketch of a window seat. Most of you have spent the morning looking at monuments. Julian Thorne's Aurora Spire is a beautiful sculpture, but people don't live in sculptures, they work in buildings. She clicked a remote and the giant screen behind her came to life. She didn't just show the building, she showed the life inside it. She showed how the hearth used natural light to reduce cortisol levels in employees. She showed the smart glass she had engineered, not stolen, that adjusted its tint based on the circadian rhythms of the human eye. Mr. Thorne claims I stole his concepts. Elena paused as she pulled up a technical diagram of a cantilevered garden. But this design requires a specific understanding of structural tension that Julian Thorne has struggled with for years. She flipped to a slide that displayed the North Pier project from 3 years ago. On the left is the official Thorne architecture filing. On the right is the original CAD file, time-stamped 3 nights before the filing, from my personal computer. If you look at the structural signatures, you'll see they are identical to the hearth. I didn't steal his vision. I was the vision. The room went deathly silent. Meredith leaned forward, her eyes narrowed at the screen. Are you claiming, Miss Vance, that the signature Thorne style is in fact your own? I am claiming that I designed the bones of his firm while he polished the skin, and today I am offering you the bones, the skin, and the soul of a project he isn't capable of imagining. For the next 20 minutes, Elena took them through the data. She spoke of thermal mass, of reclaimed timber, and of a campus that wouldn't just sit on the land, but would heal it. When she finished, she didn't look at Julian. She looked at Silas. He didn't smile, but the pride in his gray eyes was brighter than any camera flash. The deliberation took less than an hour. When the doors reopened, Julian was pacing the hallway like a caged tiger. Elena sat on a bench, her eyes closed, listening to the hum of the building. The board has reached a decision, Meredith announced, due to the innovative nature of the sustainability profile and the clarity regarding authorship. The contract for the Aurora Tech campus is awarded to the Hearth and its lead architect, Elena Vance. Julian's face went a sickly shade of gray. This is a mistake. She's a freelance draftswoman. She doesn't even have a firm. She does now, Silas said, stepping forward. He handed Elena a leather-bound folder. Sterling Ventures is officially backing the formation of Vance Architecture. We've already secured a floor in the West Loop for her headquarters. Julian looked from Silas to Elena, his mouth working but no sound coming out. The beige paint had just outshone his brightest sun. Elena, she said, standing up. She didn't feel the rush of petty joy she had expected. She just felt finished. The lawsuit you filed, my new legal team will be countersuing for 5 years of unpaid design royalties. I suggest you find a very good lawyer. You're going to need him when your investors realize who was actually doing the math. 6 months later, the morning sun hit the glass of the newsstand at the corner of Michigan and Walker. Elena paused, a cup of coffee in one hand and her briefcase in the other. There, on the cover of Architectural Digest, was a photo of her standing in the center of a half-finished timber frame. The headline read, "Elena Vance, the Architect of Humanity." Next to it, a small black-and-white blurb in the business section caught her eye. Thorne Architecture files for Chapter 11 after mass investor exodus. Elena looked at the name Julian Thorne and realized it sparked no single emotion, not anger, not hurt, not even satisfaction. He was just a ghost in a city she was busy rebuilding. Her phone buzzed. It was a text from Silas. "The Insight inspection is at 10. Dinner at 8? I found a place that has human-centric pasta." Elena smiled, a real bright thing that reached her eyes. She tucked the magazine under her arm and kept walking. She didn't look back at the glass penthouses or the towering spires. She looked straight ahead, towards the dust and the noise and the beautiful rising bones of the life she had built for herself.